If you use the internet on a daily basis, and chances are you do, you probably don't put much thought into cybersecurity. You know, your network connections, the pages you visit, the files you download. You should be thinking about these all the time. Welcome to And Security for All. Your host is Kim Hakim. We're here to help you understand, in general terms, how and why your cybersecurity should be kept in check. Now, here is Kim Hakim.
Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We're already February 10th, which is kind of crazy that we already burned through January. Welcome to another episode of And Security for All. I'm Kim Hakim, your host. Very excited to have you all join us again today. We here at FutureCon, for those of you that don't know, we put on cybersecurity conferences all over North America. We just wrapped up our first 3 in January, which they were amazing. And now we have 3 more that we're going to wrap up in February. We're going to be in Baltimore this week. So if you all happen to be out in the Baltimore area, just make sure you check out FutureCon events. We'd love to have you join us. And then we go to Detroit, and then we are here in St. Louis, which is our hometown. So very excited for that. Today, we actually have a great guest here with us, and they are a big supporter of FutureCon events as well. I have Jeff Williams, who's the CTO and founder of Contrast Security. Today, we're going to talk about welcome to the runtime era, the rapid shift of AppSec. So welcome to the show, Jeff.
To be here.
How are you?
I'm good. It's very snowy here. I am just south of Baltimore, so maybe I'll get a chance to catch up with you in, you say next week, right?
No, we're going to be there in 2 days. 2 days.
Okay.
Your team will be there.
Right.
So yeah, we'll be there in 2 days. It's so crazy, the snow. I mean, I'm in St. Louis, but I have a ski condo out in Utah. No snow at all this year. I've skied 2 times, so I'm very jealous for everyone on the East Coast and all the snow you're getting. So anyway, well, tell me, let's just, before we dive into this, I'd like to take a little bit of time and talk about you and how you came about, how you founded Contrast Security. You were the former OWASP chair, the creator of the OWASP Top Ten, and you've been, it looks like you've been talking about AppSec for a couple of decades. So let's just kind of talk about where this all started and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started as a developer and I accidentally got into security, working on some very high assurance government projects. And that I was working at a boutique consulting company doing work for NSA. And I taught in the cryptologic school at the NSA. And then that company got acquired by a .NET company. It was a big data center company called Exodus Communications. And one of our customers, GE, came to us and said, we need every line of code reviewed before it goes on the internet, which at that time, this was like, 1999. At that time was way ahead of the game. They had already figured out like, hey, this is a significant risk to us. And so my management fell over themselves trying to meet GE's needs. And so they asked me to start up an application security team. And we started doing services for all these .com companies, including GE. We did code reviews and pen tests and architecture reviews and training and a bunch of other stuff. And so out of that practice came a ton of knowledge. And, we were just all trying to figure it out. And then I accidentally found out about OWASP from a guy named Chuck Flieger, who he wrote if you're in security, you probably know who he is. He wrote the textbook called Security in Computing. And he was one of my coworkers at the consulting company and then at Exodus. And he told me about this new group starting up called OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. And so I kind of got on the mailing list and I was following along, and they said they were trying to build a training environment so that people could, experiment with vulnerabilities and understand application security. And I had already built one of those for our training practices internally. And I thought I didn't know much about open source at the time, But I thought, well, if they build one, then nobody's ever going to use mine. And I thought mine was pretty cool. So I was like, why don't we contribute this to OWASP and we'll just make it open source, whatever that is. And so I tried it, and the response was incredible. By that time, it was the dot-com crash had happened, and Exodus went bankrupt. And so I had spun off a consulting company called AppSec Security. And we got amazing attention just by contributing this, this little training environment called WebGoat. It took off like crazy, and it said everything good about our consulting company. So it was really exciting it helped us grow. And we developed this really close relationship with open source and contributed a lot of stuff over the years because it was good for our business. It was good for the world. And I don't know, it's just I think a good way to market yourself. It's much better than buying like magazine ads and doing dumb stuff at conferences. Yeah.
Well, being a person that does put on conferences, I don't know.
I don't mean the conferences are dumb. Sorry, I didn't mean to imply that. I was just like,
you've
seen some of the circus conferences where people are getting jugglers and unicyclers and motorcycles in their booth and stuff.
So with I know, like right around the corner, like RSA happening and all that.
Exactly.
Kind of stuff. Yeah, I get it. I would assume that you're much more of probably a DEF CON type person. It sounds like maybe.
I mean, it's interesting, but I can't go to DEF CON. There's too many people. You can't even get into a talk. And I mean, it's interesting. I went once, and it's fine, but it's not for me.
Well, it's definitely we went in last year just for a minute, just to see what it was like. And I think that's about all I needed to do.
Yeah.
But Black Hat is just kind of a little bit different than RSA, but they're all the same. But I always like going to them to see our friends and, our colleagues out there. But so OWASP, OWASP has turned into we love working with OWASP just because of the security practitioners that are in that organization, around the country. So it's really one of my favorite organizations to work with. So kudos to you. Yeah.
It was really fun to put OWASP together because when, it started as just a mailing list with like 20 people on it. And, that's when I joined. And a few years later, I took over as the first global chair. And then I was like, we got to set this thing up right. So I made it a not-for-profit. I set up the governance structure and the board and the chapters program and stuff. And so, opening hundreds of chapters around the world was really exciting.
That is so exciting. And you guys, we work with a lot of the different organizations, but OWASP, we always get the best quality attendees out of OWASP because there are serious practitioners over there and not just their networking and stuff like you would get with some of the others. But anyway, let's kind of dive into a little bit. And then Contrast Security, when did that come? When did that come into formation, and how did all that take off?
Yeah, it was interesting. So, as I mentioned, we did a lot of projects that we contributed to OWASP over the years. And we had this idea for a new, we were constantly using the existing tools like static analysis tools and DAST scanners and, working with WAFs and other kinds of tools. And they were pretty frustrating. So we were always looking for better approaches. And we had this idea that if we instrumented the code and viewed it from the inside, that we could get new kinds of insights that would be much more accurate, much more interesting than we could get by scanning source code or other kinds of or pen testing or whatever. And so we started down this road of building just some tools that we could use internally, and then it worked. And we had this epiphany moment where we're like, wow, we can find vulnerabilities better and faster this way. And then we realized you could also use this technique to identify and stop attacks and even analyze the way that libraries are used and how exploits happen in libraries and things. So we decided not to give that to OWASP. And we decided in order to develop it, we really needed some funding. So we spun out a new company called Contrast Security and took that idea to Silicon Valley. We got some funding. We have some great backers, not just VCs, but also big companies like Microsoft and others that have gotten behind us. And we developed this runtime security technology and have been bringing it to market.
Well, congratulations on all your success. I know just you guys have been doing, you've been with us for the last couple of years and we appreciate all your business, but we've also seen some of your successes and some of the business that you guys have closed in the industry. So we always get excited when that comes out of a future kind of event. So one which is right here in St. Louis where I'm sitting, not very far from me. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about, what you've seen, like what has changed over like the past couple of decades, what has been good and what hasn't been good, and where are you with all the changes?
So let me start by saying I'm really proud of OWASP and all the brilliant people that have contributed things there, and all the projects we've started and all the conferences we've had and all the trainings we've done. But unfortunately, if you take a step back and look at what's happened over the last 25 years, we've seen all kinds of changes in the software market. We've seen Agile and DevOps. We've seen shift left and build security in, and an explosion of new tools and technologies, but none of it has really changed the math. Most applications and APIs today are riddled with vulnerabilities. In fact, most of them are the same vulnerabilities that I put in the very first OWASP Top 10 in 2003, things like SQL injection, command injection, authentication, access control. We haven't made a significant dent in those problems, and that's a major failure. I'm not saying we haven't contributed. A lot of people are aware of the problem, but we really haven't changed the math of the problem. And I think, unfortunately, new, faster development that's powered by a lot of things, it's process, it's AI, it's new tooling, and so on, is really pushed the system past its limits. There's too much code, too many CVEs, too many vulnerabilities, too many scans, too many alerts, too many attacks. All those kinds of things have just pushed the system past its limits.
So do you think, like with some of these new apps that are out there, especially with AI, that it is really scary to just download some of these apps and just think you're going to be free of no vulnerabilities because they tell you you're going to be, and we all know you're not going to be, but for the average Joe that doesn't hear this stuff every day, all day, what would your advice be to them?
Well, we should differentiate between sort of two kinds of apps. One is the kind that you download onto your computer and download onto your phone and run those. Those are essentially client apps. They all have a connection back to some server-side apps and APIs that run in somebody's data center somewhere. And it's important to differentiate the risk here. Attackers, by and large, don't go after client applications. Like they might try to install ransomware on your computer or trick you into opening a PDF or something. But what they'd really love to do is get into that server side. The server side's where it's not just one person's data, it's everybody's data. You hack your way into, a major bank or an insurance company or a large retail, e-commerce provider. You've got everybody's data. And that's when they can really cause an incredible amount of damage. So mostly organizations focus on the sort of the server side of their applications and make sure that those are really strongly protected. Those apps are what OWASP primarily focuses on, and so on. So that's that's mostly what we're trying to protect here. Doesn't hurt anything to put some work into the client side as well. There are some risks that happen on the client side, but the really big risks, the big things that you read about in the paper, the big breaches, those are all server-side API breaches or app breaches.
So what does it, when you say this is like the year of runtime, explain to us what that means.
Yeah, so what's happening is organizations are getting overwhelmed by the amount of alerts that they get from traditional approaches to application security. Forever it's static scans where somebody's looking at your source code, or dynamic scans from the outside, or web application firewall alerts. Those are all really noisy technologies because of where they sit in the process. So SaaS tools can only look at the source code. They can't really see how the application works or runs or what it connects to. They're just looking at the source code. WAF sit outside the application and they try to protect the perimeter, but all they can see is HTTP traffic coming in and out. And so they don't really know what's going on inside the running application. And runtime security at its core is about getting inside that running application and watching how it works from within. You monitor the behavior of the application. You actually build, with runtime security, you build a model of not just one application, but how all the server-side applications connect to each other and work together and exchange data. Inside big companies, they have thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of internal applications that they use to do their work. And when you just log onto their website, it seems like, oh, well, they've got like that one app. But behind that app, there are thousands of apps that are doing all the back end processing of that company's business. And so when runtime security builds that model, then when you discover a vulnerability, you can put it in context. You can say, hey, it's not just a theoretical vulnerability that exists on a line of code. You can say, hey, that vulnerability is actually in production. It's reachable. The code can call it. It's actually exploitable. You might discover that it's connected to critical systems, that vulnerability has been discovered and maybe even exploited by the bad guys. And you can even kind of figure out what the blast radius looks like. So using all that, we call that context. And using that context, you can eliminate or reduce the risk of many of the findings. You can focus on the sort of the 2 to 5% of issues that really matter. And that's what you need to do. If you're being overwhelmed by all these alerts from, SaaS scans that produce 1,000 findings, you need to figure out a way to get down to the issues that really matter, the ones that are going to move the needle for security.
And what would that be? I mean, how is that? That seems so overwhelming to like a large corporation that might have a small security team. I imagine you'll say your tool will do this, but what explain to us, how are people focusing on this? And is this the topic of conversation in the security teams?
Yeah, I think people are looking to runtime to add context, to add that metadata to their security situation. So instead of getting a huge list of sort of unenriched findings that need to be dealt with, instead you get a very focused list of the things that really matter, the critical vulnerabilities, the ones that are in production, being exploited right now. That's where you need to focus your effort first. So it kind of, you've heard about shift left, which is the idea you should move security way left in the process to early in development and prevent vulnerabilities from happening in the first place. That never really worked. It just created more theoretical findings and pushed them onto development teams to the point where developers were spending 19% of their time doing security work. What we're saying is it works better if you turn that around. You put protection first in production, runtime protection, so that if there are vulnerabilities there, they can't get exploited. That's sort of the first stage. But you take the context also that you gather in production and you build this contextual scoring model so that you can prioritize really accurately. And then you push the things that really matter. You get those to developers so they can fix the problems that really matter. And we even pushed into AI-driven remediation. We think it's instead of having developers have to, investigate every vulnerability and do the research and figure it out. It's with AI today, we can figure out exactly what the problem is in the code and generate a good fix for it. So that all the developer has to do is review a PR and click OK. that process, sort of working backwards from production backwards into development, is much more effective.
So you are seeing AI can help limits in AppSec. So give us a couple of examples as far as what you see, what's happening now and what you'll continue to see in the future.
Yeah, so AI is interesting. And you'll read stories in the press about AI discovering vulnerabilities and doing code review for developers. I don't think that's really the right approach. Finding vulnerabilities has never really been the problem. The problem is doing that deep analysis. And it's hard for AI to do that deep analysis because it can't bring in the entire software code base at one time. LLMs have something called a context window. And it can have bigger or smaller, but it's certainly not big enough to hold an entire code base. And so it's difficult for AI to see the whole app and figure out which vulnerabilities are real and which are false positives. So the way that we like to think of leveraging AI is giving AI great data directly captured from running applications in production. So we can take this runtime model, this digital twin of your application layer. We can calculate all that stuff without AI. We'll gather the data, all the telemetry, build this great model. And then we give that to AI, let AI access it so it can ask questions about what's really going on. That way, whenever we see a vulnerability, we put it in context. We say, here's why it's important to fix this one right away and why these other 10 you don't have to worry about. But it also lets you see things like design problems and sort of how are the trends in my application security program going? Am I managing this stuff right? And we see when you power traditional application security workflows like threat modeling, pen testing, compliance, remediation, when you power those workflows with AI that has access to this powerful graph context model, that's when we get these really incredible streamlined effects on the workflows. So we're seeing, threat modeling that takes, you can cut the work time of doing a threat model by 50 or 80%. I've done a lot of threat models, and most of the work is like gathering the data. You have to go talk to developers and get surveys and look at old Visio diagrams, and it takes weeks. We can gather all that data at runtime and bring it in so that we can feed the threat modelers with really great data. We can even enhance that data with AI before it gets to the humans. And so we're streamlining all the traditional processes, which are still great processes. You need to do threat modeling and architecture work. You need to do penetration testing and compliance. But imagine you're a pen tester. You can either go into an app blind and all they give you is a user login and a URL, or imagine you went into that pen test with a model of exactly how this application works. You know which URLs lead to database connections, which ones evaluate expressions, which ones parse XML documents, and you can very quickly go through and validate whether those things are all done correctly. The results are just much more complete, much more accurate, and much less work.
Have you I'm sure there's probably been many times where AI has just kind of blown your mind, like, oh my gosh, I would have never found this if it wasn't for AI. And do you see that, where you're just something that would have taken you a week to maybe find a vulnerability that you find right away and you're like, I would have never caught this? I mean, are you seeing differences like that?
I'm trying to think of a good example. We use a lot of AI internally to develop software, and I use it to build things. But the process there is, I don't think that AI should be the engine that's actually doing a lot of that work. It's great to use AI to discover some pattern in the code that is difficult. But once you've figured out that, oh, I see, Spring applications can go sideways in this particular way, it's then best to take that pattern and put it into a tool that runs 100 times faster than AI and costs a 1,000th of the amount to use it, and produces accurate results every time instead of being sort of non-deterministic. You see what I'm saying? Like it's AI is great for exploring stuff, but once you figure it out, you should turn it into a tool that's super high efficiency that can run over and over and over again in a really fast way.
Well, maybe this leads into the next question I was going to ask you is what should security practitioners, what should they be skeptical about when it comes to the AI hype?
So I think, I've harped on one probably enough now, is like, I don't think you should jump on the bandwagon and go like, hey, I'm throwing out all my tools, I'm just going to use AI to analyze everything. I think you're going to end up with like extremely expensive, very weak static analysis results if you do that kind of thing. I think there are lots of great use cases for AI. I think automatically remediating vulnerabilities is a very interesting one. I think automated threat modeling and automated pen testing are very interesting. And I think compliance is a great area that's ripe for reinvention in the era of AI. Compliance, organizations spend huge amounts of time on compliance, but imagine we could automatically gather up that evidence, package it, make an attestation, do digital signatures on it. All that is, I think, sort of the future of compliance, and it doesn't have to be as painful as it's been in the past.
Yeah, because I do definitely think people are like, when we meet people that are in compliance, we're just like, ugh, that must be such a boring job, but now everything's changing. And what are you seeing like with the regulatory, pressure that we might have, especially with government agencies that probably have old school compliance, things implemented already? How are they adapting to the change?
Kim, I think we are in the most interesting time in application security ever. I mean, I've been doing it since the beginning, and it's really exciting, and there's a lot of things changing right now. Let me try and sum it up. In the EU, they are implementing some very progressive policies. They have something called the Product Liability Directive that they put in place almost 2 years ago now, and they have to finish implementing by November of this year. And what it says is kind of interesting. It doesn't require people to do compliance. It doesn't require any processes or attestations or anything like that. What it requires is if you build a product with a defect, including security defect, explicitly including security defects, and because of that defect, your product harms someone, you are liable for the damage. And it shifts all of the burden onto software producers. That has never been the case in the history of software. They are basically, software has been a special kind of product where software producers are allowed to write these click wrap agreements that say, we're not liable, you shouldn't use this for anything. If you use it at all, we're not liable, like all that stuff. But now that's out the window. You can't do that anymore. If you build a product and it has a security defect and it gets exploited, you're liable for the costs of that breach. So I think that has potential to change the whole software market. At the same time, so that's super interesting. At the same time, the US is backtracking. We had executive order 4 or 5 years ago that was, I think, very forward-looking as well. It said we're going to have radical transparency, we're going to do SBOMs, we're going to do all this. You have to follow the NIST SSDF, the software security development framework, and now all those executive orders and the implementing regulations are all getting rolled back. So you don't have to do attestation anymore. You don't have to follow stuff. It's we're loosening the rules at the same time that the EU has actually thrown out the rules and gone all the way over to the other end of the spectrum. And so it's going to be difficult for software companies to navigate this, right? Like we sell software to both US and EU companies, and we're going to have to decide, like, how are we going to, I guess we've always internally made the decision we're going to write secure code. We put a lot of work into it, and we eat our own dog food. We use contrast on contrast 100% of the time. But it is interesting for companies, right? Like, do you just stop selling software in the EU if you don't want to take on that liability? Do you stop your security program if all you want to do is sell software in the United States? It just, everything's in flux, and, I love it.
Well, I'm glad you love it. That's good, because it seems so overwhelming, and I don't know. This has been already an interesting year, 2026. I feel like practitioners, even our events, I'm seeing, it's almost like they're doubling, but we do bring really good speakers, and we do bring great education. But I feel like it's just something's changing. People can't get enough education right now because things are rapidly changing every single day. I mean, I sit in these events for 8 hours. I listen to the speakers every single, almost every week, and everything's changing from what it was 2 months ago. So how does all of this that's changing, not only with the regulatory changes, but just with AI, do you think it's changing the conversations in the boardroom and at the top level executives are not, do you think they have to be obviously taking things more serious about when it comes to their security posture?
I hope so. You'd think so,
but we don't know.
I'm not sure that we have the incentives set correctly. And let me just ask you: do you bank online?
Yes.
And did you choose your bank based on how well they do security?
No, but I chose a bank that was smaller, and I think they're spot on their security, way better than the bigger banks.
It could be. That's not been my experience. I've spent a lot of time inside lots of different.
I better knock on some wood right now.
I'm not trying to create fear. What I'm asking is, do you think that you should be able to choose? Really, you can't choose your vendor based on how secure they write their code, because it's not public. Nobody has to disclose anything about how they write their software. And I think, the vision that we were headed towards in the US before we started sort of deregulating was that should be transparent to consumers, that companies should disclose the basics of how they secure their software. Do they test it for security? Do they fix the problems that they find? Do they use components that have known vulnerabilities? Do they have runtime defenses in place to detect attacks? And, do they respond to those attacks? I think those are fair questions for consumers to ask. And right now, there's no way to get answers to those questions in the US. The EU is sort of changing that by with their liability approach. But they could do more in the area of transparency as well. So I guess I'm just curious, do you think that sounds fair, or am I off my rocker?
Well, when you say rephrase, what do you think? What you're asking me sounds fair.
So do you think that companies like your bank ought to have to disclose a little bit about how they secure the software that they produce, that you are trusting with your finances?
Yeah, it's scary. It's a very scary thing. I mean, I run a business, you run a business, so it's very scary how vulnerable we can be based on the third party of the bank that we're using,
And because because they're not transparent at all, it means that market forces can't work to encourage security, right? If you're a consumer and you have to choose between 5 institutions, you can't right now choose the one that's the most secure. Even if you care about that a lot, you just have to choose based on, how pretty their logo is or whatever. And so I don't think that's right. I think that's something that we need to change.
I think people just think I mean, I use my American Express card before I use a Visa because I know if something gets breached or hacked on it, American Express is going to cover it. It's
Mm.
not necessarily the same with some of the other banks. So that, but who knows how long that, who knows? We don't know. You just hope and you pray that if
And there are
somebody,
And there are some companies that do a great job at security. There's not as many as you'd think, but there's some that put a lot of work into it. But it doesn't really make sense for them to do it because there's not a lot of market advantage in writing secure code. Like maybe you can get just as many customers, and maybe you can dodge getting breached for long enough to make it to worthwhile. That's why I think it just makes sense for the government to help encourage companies to disclose and be transparent, and that way that we can use market forces to encourage better cybersecurity, and which is just not possible right now.
So since you do have your background is development, you were a developer. So
Yeah.
do you think that developers' security is first and foremost on their mind, or do you think they're just thinking about writing code and they go in that tunnel and that's where they stay?
Yeah, I want to be super clear here because I think a lot of people blame developers for insecure code, and it's not fair. First of all, developers have an insane amount of things to learn and understand. There's new frameworks and new programming paradigms and new languages and new libraries and so much getting thrown at them all the time. They are constantly learning. Same time, security is a massive field. There are over 1,000 what are called CWEs, or common weaknesses. These are just classes of problems. And MITRE has enumerated all of them, and they're almost all tricky. Like it takes a while to get your head around, like CSRF or XXE or server-side request forgery or any of the other vulnerabilities. Clickjacking is a simple one, but it's a little bit tricky. I bet you didn't know that an attacker could float an invisible iframe of your bank in front of their website and trick you into clicking on one of the buttons at your bank. That's clickjacking, and it's tricky. It doesn't, like, people don't normally think of things like SQL injection. They say like, oh yeah, I guess an attacker could modify the meaning of my queries. And so I have a lot of sympathy for developers. What we need is to get the developers focused on the things that actually matter. We cannot train all the developers in the world in how to do secure coding across not just those 1,000 CWEs, but across all the languages and all the frameworks and all the technologies that they have to use. It's just not, there's like, I don't know, 20 million developers in the world, and it's an intractable problem. So we have to be better. We have to identify the weaknesses that matter, the vulnerabilities in their code, in their environment, and present them to developers in a way that allows them to deal with it.
Well, I love our developers that we use. I think they're amazing, and we're lucky, we're working on a project, and I love our developers. So I have nothing but the utmost respect for them. So I definitely did not mean to give any kind of a disregard to developers, because
no, it's not. It's natural, I think. Who wrote the code with this vulnerability in it to try to blame them? But you got to recognize that they're part of a system. I like Ice-T says, hate the player. Don't hate the player, hate the game, right? And I think the developers are the players here. They are part of a system that virtually guarantees that they cannot succeed at writing secure code all the time.
So to kind of sum up everything we've talked about, which is going to be a little hard, but let's try to in the next couple of minutes. AppSec, do you feel like at this time right now, it's the most important and exciting moment of AppSec since you've been around it?
There's a ton of things changing. AI is just one of many factors, including international law and a bunch of other stuff that is really changing the game for application security. I also think the adoption of runtime technologies like Contrast is really changing the game for a lot of companies. So at the same time, things are getting more complicated. We're trying to provide much more detailed and accurate visibility into how applications actually work and where the problems are, and help companies focus on what really matters.
So one last question. If you were starting application security today, what would you do differently?
You mean if I was starting out as a new
Yeah,
specialist in application
yeah,
security?
yeah. Or like when you got into it a couple decades ago, I mean, we were
Yeah,
just hearing that word. So,
yeah.
things have changed so much. Is there anything that you could maybe say you would do differently, or any advice out there for maybe the next generation that's getting into that sector of cyber, what they should be doing differently than what you did when you first started?
It's a good question. I mean, I had the privilege of being able to learn it from the beginning. So there wasn't that much to learn at the beginning. And we were
Hmm.
working out a lot of the stuff ourselves. So I got to learn it, accretionally over 25 years. I think, to somebody walking into it today, there's already a massive amount of existing knowledge. Um, I think, I'd try to focus on two sides of the equation. One is understanding the vulnerabilities themselves. There's no replacement for actually understanding how those the common weaknesses work. And I encourage you to start with SQL injection, write some code, demonstrate it to yourself, and make sure you understand it. Use deliberately vulnerable apps like WebGoat and others that can help you really understand and get that really deep understanding of how those things work. And that's something that'll come over time. I would get proficient with AI. AI can make a lot of things faster in application security. So I think there's, and it's a skill. You got to spend some time and work with Claude and other things that can really help you build tools and understand problems and write your own exploits and things like that. AI can make that happen a lot faster. And I think I'd really become a student of how organizations work application security at scale. Try to understand the processes that people use and where there are opportunities to streamline those processes. I think AppSec is really inefficient in a lot of organizations because of, just historically, we haven't updated a lot of the processes. You're still looking at ancient documents like BSIM and NIST 800 series kind of stuff. And I think we know that those things don't work. We've tried them for 2 decades and they're not changing the math. They're not changing the outcomes that we're looking for. So I would, it's good to learn those things and then focus on how can we do this faster? How can we get the outcomes that we want more accurately, more efficiently, and more effectively? And that's where the AppSec industry has to go. That's where the innovation is going to happen.
So when you look back over going back to OWASP and looking back to, what you helped create, are you proud of where it is today? And is it still serving the mission that you wanted it to, do when you helped turn this into a .org?
Yeah. So I stepped down from OWASP it's over 10 years ago now. And I thought, I did my time. I'm going to turn this over to somebody else who can run it, because it is a big job to run a volunteer or an organization as a volunteer. OWASP since then has had challenges. It's a large organization. It has funding challenges and organizational challenges. I think I'm super proud of it, and a lot of those problems are getting resolved, and the organization has been growing for its entire lifetime. So I'm super proud about that. What I would really like to see out of OWASP is to think bigger, to focus on the the projects and initiatives that could actually make a real difference. A couple of years ago, OWASP had a yearly goal that they set out, which was to train 500 developers in application security. And there's nothing wrong with that as a goal, but with 20 million developers in the world, that is not going to change the trajectory. It's not going to change anything. And so I want OWASP to focus on strategic issues like pushing for transparency in the market, creating tools that encourage transparency, and try to fix the sort of systemic problems in AppSec, and not focus as much on the, here's a little guidance on how not to do XSS, and yet another version of that document. There's already dozens of those out there from every organization. We don't need another one.
And we're kind of a little past our time, but one of the things that, I have to mention is like OWASP. I know, like down in Southern California, they had some heavy hitters that are, industry leaders in the industry, but these people are starting to retire now, so, it's like all those heavy hitters are retiring now, and, who carries the torch,
Yeah. I mean, I still love AppSec. I think it's a really interesting problem. And from the first time that I hacked an application in high school, it's always been super intriguing to me to try to trick code into doing something that it wasn't intended to do. And so, I've got a lot of energy. I'm still writing tools all the time. And I'm optimistic about the future. I just think, we've got to start racking up some wins because, it's been a long time and we're really not getting better fast.
Well, I appreciate everything. I appreciate you being on the show. We appreciate Contrast Security. Kudos to you and everything you've done in your career. And hopefully I'll get to see you in person one day and shake your hand and say thank you for all your support of FutureCon and being on the show today. And I wish you the best of luck. Anyone out there, I would assume, what is the best way they can find you if they have questions for you?
Oh, yeah, great question. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You should be able to find me, Jeff Williams, on LinkedIn pretty easily. And I'll answer your messages if you send them directly. And or you can just reach out directly to me. Our website is contrastsecurity.com, or you can reach me at jeff@contrastsecurity.com.
Well, amazing, Jeff. I wish I could have talked to you another hour, but time moved fast. So thank you so much for joining this episode today, and love to have you back again. And again, congratulations on everything you're doing to change really the posture of our security out there. So thanks, you, everyone. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Yep. Oops. Sorry, Jeff. But thank you again, Jeff, for being on the show. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into another episode of And Security for All. Again, we're going to be over in Baltimore on Thursday. We have a great lineup of speakers. Love to have you guys. We run all of our events in a hybrid mode, so you can also join in virtually if you can't be there in person. I hope you all have a great week. Stay safe, stay secure, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.